Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Dr.Suman Kollipara. He comes with a unique background of veterinary medicine, computer science, and studied ancient yogic wisdom and non-dualistic approaches to wellness and leadership. He also serves as the president of Peace Tree Center. Thank you, Dr. Suman, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Suma, for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
So when I was researching about you, I see that you started this journey a long time ago and got interested in non-duality and met your teacher, Sanira Bapuji. So I would love to know your journey, how you got started and what got you interested in non-duality.
Oh, great question for the starter. So I think it goes back to like my early 20s. Like my first part of my life was in India. So it was all like very smooth, no suffering, no pain. You know, I was doing very good with my academics. And then I moved to States for my higher studies. And then kind of life kind of started there with many things happening at the same time. And at that time, I went through a phase of suffering and emotional turmoil and worry and stress. And towards the end of that, I was searching for happiness. Frankly, I was observing myself, and I felt like, you know, there are days when I'm happy, there are days that I'm not happy. And whenever certain things happened in my environment, I would get affected with it and unable to kind of maintain that state of happiness or peace. And that really triggered me this quest or search. And in a way, like I didn't kind of go persistently searching for that anywhere. I haven't like reached out to any teachers or masters, but I started to read a little bit. You know, friends gave me a few books, and you know, I started to expose myself, and some of these books were good. You know, some of the self-help books I was reading, they would give that instant kick, if you may want to call that, and you feel like, yes, I get it, but then you again slip back into those emotional roller coaster rides. And as I was going through that journey, I even went back to India for a couple of years, went to Himalayas and went to a few places to kind of, you know, understand a little bit about these aspects of how to overcome suffering, how to be in that state of constant happiness. But that didn't really do much. And then I moved to Vancouver, and that's when I met what I call her as an ancient sage, Sunita Amma. I did a session of meditation in her presence. She teaches a form of meditation called Sukshma Meditation. And in that meditation, in that like first meditation itself, I was experiencing something that I've never experienced in my life. And when I say an experience, I'm not talking about an experience of something outside, like something experienced by senses or some kind of like excitement or anything like that. But it was almost like nullification of mind. It was as if like the mind just came to complete standstill. And all I could see was just, it was there. It, like, as they say, it is, that easiness continued for a long time. And I was just being there. And again, the word being strikes that experience. Like it was just being, there was nothing. There was like complete void in a way. And as I came out of that meditation, I carried that into my day-to-day life. Like I was going back to work, into my other activities. And even though these other activities were going on, I did not get disturbed with those activities. I did not get shaken by changes in environment. And it lasted for some time. And then I went back. So I did about 4 sessions. And as I continued, I started to experience like more and more subtler states. And I started to realize why Sunitama calls this Sukshma. Sukshma is a Sanskrit word which translates to micro. I almost started to feel that subtlest of the subtle states, which I wouldn't experience or realize. And then the life, of course, is continuing. But as I continued, that state of, I would say, a sense of equanimity. Equanimity is that state of, complete balance was there. And that state of oneness also, I started to feel one with everyone. There was no judgments about anyone. There isn't any delusion about, what I'm going through, what I'm seeing out there. It was as if I was in a flow. It was like I was just flowing with everything. There was no fears. And it almost felt like my suffering kind of just disappeared. Now, that was my first experience of a state like this, but I did not have any background in Advaita or non-duality, or in fact, even spirituality. Like, I've read a few books, I was no way close to even like calling a beginner in that. But within a few weeks, I started to get some books, either from my teacher or from others, where when I started reading, you call it Bhagavad Gita or Adi Shankaracharya's works like Atma Bodha or Viveka Chudamani, all these great ancient scriptures which were deeply embedded in non-dualistic philosophy. And as I was reading through those, I started to understand that the experience I have gone through was exactly what they were talking about there. And that experience continued in my life. And that was like a big aha moment for me. It's like, wow, it looks like I've actually stuck this treasure without realizing that I was actually in that. And as I went deeper and deeper into, reading these books, I have like, wow, this is exactly what it is happening to me. And then the beauty of a teacher like Sunitama is she doesn't call herself like even a teacher or a master or a guru or anything like that. She's just living a very normal household life. But then whenever people go to her for looking answers for these questions, or even people are going to her for healing from illnesses or for spiritual self-realization and spiritual understanding, she doesn't really speak much. She's very simple. So she has not even told me that, Suman, this is actually what you're experiencing. This is what it is. It was like, oh, the class is done. Okay, Suman, take care, be careful, done, right? And then that's when I realized, like, she is such a very capable teacher who was self-realized, and not only self-realized, but helping others in that path. And that was my first experience of this and first exposure to non-duality.
You mentioned something about subtle experiences, and I know it can be very difficult to describe it in words, but can you share some of those, what you mean by subtle experiences, and what experiences you had?
Definitely, Suma. So the subtle experiences are, the first one, as I mentioned, is that complete nullification of mind, as if the mind did not exist, not only in the meditation, but also in the world. And that was the beauty, where I was operating, I was doing my duties, work and everything, but I did not feel like I'm actually like using the mind with an effort. It was like a flow. So that was one first difference. Now, there were other things where, I myself, being coming from that background of, veterinary medicine and scientific background, I could also feel like, the awareness at that subtlest level, like I could feel like there was some changes happening at a cellular level in my body. And it also showed up in my physical well-being. Before that, I used to have some medical issues with my tummy, and those just kind of vanished. And there are other simple things that I noticed, like my voice was becoming very melodious. Like even just listening to my voice was like a melody to me. When I was looking at myself in a mirror, I used to see that glow in my face, and the eyes used to change, like the way they used to be before to how they are. There used to be that twinkle in the eye. And again, these might sound odd to some of the listeners or many people out there. But again, this was not like a blind faith or anything. You're coming from that scientific background and a very analytical mind. I was really dissecting each of these experiences. And there was like a point, like even after 4 sessions with her, I stopped. I'm like, okay, I'm done. Thank you. And I went back. And this is another interesting part, I think, very important to know, even in the non-dualistic philosophy, is that it's not like you have this and then it's all over. Like you have this experience and it's done, you're self-realized. And my experiment kind of proved that, because after 4 sessions, I stopped, and then I was kind of practicing on my own. And I couldn't get to that state where the mind was completely nullified when I was doing it on my own. And that's where I was like, oh, there is something happening in Sunita Amma's presence. And I went back after a few weeks. And then again, I started to have those experiences, same state of mind. So this again helped me to understand the importance of a teacher. Yes, I do understand non-duality is a direct path. It's a path where you realize the self and the game is over. But I think, especially in the chaotic modern world we live in, there is so much of turbulence around us, inside us. There is pollution outside and inside, the mental pollution. So all of these factors doesn't really allow us to find that subtle self. And that self, again, is so subtle, that being or self, it's very difficult to, it's not something that I perceive with my senses. It's not something that I perceive because I'm analyzing. I'm like, oh yeah, this is self, this is not self. It's not that. It is just a state of being. So as I started continuing, I realized that to really catch that self, one has to go through a process called cleaning. And I do understand, like, there are sometimes people are like, no, cleaning is yoga. Yoga is different from non-duality. Advaita is a different path. But I feel, they are mutually symbiotic. They actually contribute to each other. They are, especially in the modern world, maybe in the ancient times, when the world, what they call Satya Yuga, where everyone was living a life of purity and divinity, dharmic, righteous life, it might have been that way. But I think in the modern world, where we're living with so much of disturbance and chaos and pollution, it is not easy to catch that subtlest of the subtle self. And that's where a teacher can help us to cleanse. So what I realized in this subtle journey, and I also realized why it's called Sukshma. See, we have this physical body, which we can see, right? And then we don't realize that there is a subtle body, which is called Sukshma Sarira, which is your mental body. Your mental and emotional states are all registered in that subtle Sukshma state. Now, that is where we accumulate a lot of these patterns, accumulate a lot of these vices. We can talk about that eventually. But so we have all these tendencies like anger, jealousy, greed, false ego, all of these lurking in these dark corners of that subtle body or that mind, subtle mind. To cross those barriers and experience or realize that self is not that easy. And that's where I realized, and there might be people who are born enlightened and they know that, oh, this is the self and this is it, I realized it. But I think what I've noticed in the world today is we are so deeply, kind of embedded in this chaos. It really takes someone to kind of lift us up from that and say, okay, here it is, and give that experience. And that experience becomes very powerful. And in fact, Adi Shankara has written a fantastic book called Aparokshanubhuti. And it's actually one of my favorite texts. And when we talk about Aparokshanubhuti, is talking about an experience here. There are three types of experiences in our life. One is called Pratyaksha, which is perceived by the senses. Like I'm seeing you right now, so I know that Suma is right in front of me. So that's a Pratyaksha, direct, like you're in front of me and my senses are perceiving it. When my senses are not there, I cannot perceive you there. Now there is another experience called Paroksha. Paroksha is not with the senses, but with the mind. It's like I've heard from someone that so-and-so is such, or Los Angeles is a very beautiful city, or Vancouver is a beautiful city. And I'm visualizing it because it's coming indirectly from somebody else. And my mind is processing that, and my mind is experiencing that. That is Paroksha. Now what Adi Shankara is talking about is Aparoksha. It is beyond that. And it is beyond, but at the same time, Aparokshanu is basically the experience of it within. It is not from outside. It is not from the senses. It is happening from inside, and you know it. The others may not know it, others may not perceive it, but you know. And that's why I guess it's called self-realization, not others' realization. So that's so those are subtle things, like, you know, like I said, the physical subtle changes, the wellness, the happiness, the constant state of bliss, if we may want to call it, because happiness and opposite, a dual experience called sadness, and then of course bliss, what they call ananda, is that absolute state. Now it's not that it's going to last forever. So what happened after that is, then after a few years or 2 or 3 years in this process, I got married. I got into a marriage life, work, children. All of these now start adding a bit of overhead to your day-to-day life. So you're dealing with people more closely, emotions, different experiences. All of these can obviously pose a challenge to your path. But again, the greatness of a good teacher is they guide you to say that, Suman, this is actually a platform for you to test the realizations. You're now in the world, and I want to see how you are able to carry this experience and live the same life that you used to before entering the world. And I think that really is amazing. It's like you learn in the classroom, and now you're in the world and you're putting that into practice, and then you refine in that practice more and more. It's almost like you start with like a little seed, you blossom, and then it becomes not a fruit directly, right? You see that, and then it slowly ripens, and then it becomes a fruit. So it was a gradual experience.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful experience with me, Suman. And based on like what I've spoken with, like there are so many different ways to arrive at self-realization. Everyone has their own path, and everyone has many different expressions of how they realize themselves. Overall, I've noticed is like some Advaita teachers, they talk about how one should not mistake experience as self-realization. What are your thoughts on that?
Very well said, because it all again depends on the definition of experience, Suma. Is that experience from senses or an emotional experience, or is it a realization, more of a realization? Like I mentioned in the beginning, it is more of a state of being, right? And again, it's difficult to translate that. And I think for lack of words, we tend to use the word experience. Maybe the right word is actually realization, just realization. And as Advaitins say that, self is already there. It's there, but we haven't realized it. It is being there, it is there now, it will be there forever. And it is not just at one focal point, it is spread all over. It's the omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient being. So it is not an experience, but at the same time, I think that realization itself reflects at a physical, mental, emotional level. Not only that, it has to, because if you look at what is the self is, just now we said, it's all pervading, which means that it is there in your physical level, it is there at your mental. Your mind is also the self. We are just mistaking it to be mind. Your body is also self, but you're separating it and saying it's body. Your emotions are also emanating from that self, right? So which means that the self actually is there in all of them, but then suddenly you're seeing that self in those states. Like when you're doing work, you're only working through the self. Your emotions, you realize, oh, it's an emotion, but it is emanating from that self. Now, the beauty is the modern scientific research actually helps to an extent validate. I wouldn't say completely. There is always this conflict between spirituality and science, and I don't want to get there right now, probably another topic. But if you look at the neuroscience studies, what they're saying is when people meditate, they're actually able to see changes in the brain. Now they're talking about neuroplasticity. People are talking about, healing from anxiety, depression, and many other mental illnesses, psychosomatic disorders, when they go through this path of self-realization. So there is no doubt that the self-realization translates into an experience at a somatic level, at a physical, mental, emotional level, and it does heal your body. And that's what I'm seeing even with, Sunita Amma, whoever comes to that meditation. I've seen people bounce back from some of the most complex illnesses, which, like for example, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, colitis, even people, in terminal states of cancer, they would feel that, wow, there is something profound that I found. Like I've known people who have come thinking that, oh, I'm going to die, and they were in pain. And then they went through like 2 or 3 sessions and they're like, oh, now I don't have fear of death. Now, where do you think that fearlessness is coming from? Even though they may not know because they haven't studied any scriptures or philosophy, but they're saying suddenly that they're not fearless anymore. They're like, Amma, I don't have fear of death anymore. I can face the death because I realize that, because they realize that they are not just this body. They have just realized that they are not just those emotions or the mind. They've just realized something else. They may not know a name for it. Like I did not know a name for it when I've gone through that realization state, but only after referring some of these scriptures, I'm like, oh, now I get what Lord Krishna was talking about. I get what Adi Shankara is talking. I know what Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is talking about. Vivekananda is talking about, right? Or Rupert Spira is talking about, Adya Shanti or Eckhart Tolle, all these great masters. So to answer your question, yes, it is the self-realization, but I think it does translate into the experiences at a physical, mental, and emotional level. There is no doubt, because it is an embodiment of self. Everything is self.
And why do you think that kind of healing energy is more noticeable in your teacher, Sanira Bapuji's presence? Like, what could it be about her presence that's initiating these kind of healings?
Wow, fantastic question, Suma. So, and this would, see, again, coming from a medical background, scientific background, these were the questions I pondered throughout, like, because I didn't want to take anything for face value or blind faith. I was like in the analysis, and we'll talk about some of the research we actually are doing now. We're going to be continuing some of that work, because at the end of the day, I want to actually validate this with science. Now, going back to why do you think that Sunita Amma is actually able to do this, or what is different about her, is I've started to understand her as, of course, you continue the journey. In the beginning, you just look at that person as a physical being, like a physical person, um, and you don't know who that person is. I even actually made fun, had those fights of ego. Obviously, I later realized that it was my own ego that was bothering. And as I went forward in the journey, I realized how deluded I was in the beginning stages. But you start to see that people who are at that state are truly in union with everything. You know, we talk about that oneness, non-duality. I think she's an embodiment of that. It is where she not only transcends her physical, mental, emotional well-being, but she's becoming one with the person who's in front of her. Now, we hear this in form of miracles from ancient wisdom, like, you know, how sages used to heal people who are far away, people, you know, sending energy, sending vibrations. And even, you know, I remember reading Paramahamsa Yogananda's autobiography of Yogi, where he talks about his teacher, Guru, Sri Yukteswarji, how he healed him from just being very far, right? And I did not, of course, immediately believe in it. But as I went through the experiences I'm going through with Sunita, I realized that these are the beings who have truly transcended that physical state, truly living in that pure self, that one self. Now, what happens if you're all the time living in that state of oneness? When you're living in that state of oneness, you are becoming one with everything and everyone around, which means your empathy kicks in such a big way. That empathy, that pure love, actually, you know, ultimate culmination of any of the self-realization process, Suma, is that pure love. That pure love for all beings, which we have seen in all the traditions, whether it is Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Sikhism, all these great masters who were coming from all these lineages, they were embodiment of that pure love, who would be ready to give their life for others. And of course, that is very rare to find in modern days. But I think I've been blessed to find someone who's an embodiment of that. Now, when somebody is living at that state of oneness, that is one aspect of it, oneness. The other aspect is that self, what we talk about, is actually a very high vibrational state. And again, when I say vibration, I'm not talking about like a physical vibration, but when they call omnipotent, that state of pure consciousness or pure self, omnipotent, they're talking about like it's being the most powerful, highly potent, an embodiment of potency. So when somebody is living at that level of consciousness or that pure self, they become that energy. They become an embodiment of that pure self, and that radiates and heals people. And this is very hard to even like imagine unless someone experiences it, because when we talk about consciousness, it's not a physical thing. It is, and you can experience that. Like when I go to, like, as I started to mature in my journey, I used to like go and sit in front of her and we were just talking. And then within few, like I could literally see how my brain, like I could feel in my brain, all the neural networks like crunk, 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 like I would carry stuff from outside in the world. You know, no matter what, we go through certain frustrations, certain turbulences in the mind, and then of course they're registered in the brain. And I could literally see my brain going click, 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 click. It's almost like it's like loosening all the neural networks. And I could see my face becoming small. And I could almost see, like, I'm not seeing a physical, but I'm like, okay, there is that feeling of oneness. There is that sense of oneness. And I could actually feel, like, you don't see it. It's not even like feeling with the senses, but you're almost like getting engulfed with something. And I like don't want to give a name for it. But then that is slowly bringing my mind to that stillness. And that's when I realized, wow. And that's why I call her an ancient sage, because after, of course, all these observations and analysis, is like, this is how ancient sages used to be. Like when you read scriptures from all these different traditions, these were like embodiments of highest consciousness, where people would heal from even most complex illnesses. And that is possible. And now, not only that, I'll also add one more thing to that, that because of the pure divine empathy, they're actually taking upon the suffering from us. So when I talk about this concept of purification of mind, cleansing of that subconscious, at the end, everything is energy. Everything is a vibration. So what happens is when you're in the presence of such beings, they are becoming one with you and you're becoming one with them. When I say one, not at a physical, mental, emotional level, but at a consciousness level, you're both like suddenly like at that level, and then you're meeting at that level. And then this energy is literally like penetrating through this. And I always call this, it's like a laser, which you can't see. And that laser is just, it's almost like clearing and cleaning that subconscious clutters, that accumulations that we have. And where does that go? It's got to go somewhere. It goes back to her. She actually goes through that suffering and pain. And now I'll also validate this. I used to be like, okay, fine, it is happening. Probably it is happening. But then there was a point where I started to go through that when I started doing meditations with others. And I was like, oh, now I see what was happening. So when you reach that tipping point where you start to live in that state of pure consciousness, in that state of pure self, pure being, then you're again, when you're interacting with others who might be at different states of consciousness, you can start to feel. So I think it's a journey everyone can, everyone eventually will, as per the laws of the universe. So when people are at that level of higher states of consciousness, they become an embodiment of that pure vibration, and then they're able to help others heal. Because I've seen, like, people who are on medication for like anxiety, depression, and even other complex mental illnesses, or even physical illnesses, and they would like heal within a matter of few sessions. And then not only heal, but they started to feel that physical changes, physical strength, mental calmness, complete stillness of mind, and emotional balance, all of these. And we today know psychosomatic illnesses are all about what goes on in your mind reflects your body, because your mind and body are not different. They are one. Your body is just a reflection of the mind. So when the mind is changing, when the mind is shifting from a lower mind to a higher mind, obviously your body is going to respond to that. So
very well described, Suman. Can you, like, I remember you mentioning about Adi Shankara's work during beginning of this conversation. What were some of his other insights that stood out for you in his work?
Oh, wow. That's like a few days of conversation, a never-ending saga. It's beautiful. Like, I mean, the first book actually I read was Atma Bodha. Atma Bodha is where, he talks about, he actually talks about this, which I think I've said many times, is, he emphasizes actually a need for a guru or a teacher. It's unfortunate that many who have reached the state of enlightenment, they don't talk about the teachers and gurus, which is fine. But I personally feel it is so important. Like, we always respect the teachers who taught us something, like high school teacher, or a teacher who taught you music or dance or a craft, or somebody who coached you in coding, whatever, right? I mean, we give so much gratitude for such teachers and masters, imagine someone who's actually revealing your true identity. It's like revealing the treasure which is invaluable. It becomes so important to really acknowledge their role in this journey. And I feel Adi Shankara, whom we consider the greatest of the great, like the phenomenal master and guru, in every text that he has wrote, especially in Atma Bodha, when I was reading, he says that this is something that is very difficult to attain without direction from a teacher or a guru or a master. He also gives an analogy. He says it is like if you just read a book and you try to realize this, it's like going into a forest filled with all these trees completely, where you cannot see the sky and it's all dark and you're just running through this forest. And I connected to that so well, because before I met Sunita, I have read books, to a certain extent, like I mentioned in the earlier part of the discussion, but it didn't do anything to me. I even practiced yoga myself. I did practice meditation on my own before I met Sunita Amma. It was like, okay, it was like, yeah, it was just a routine, a daily routine. Like, yeah, I would go do my yoga. It's all good. It's like a physical exercise. But I really understood the essence of yoga, which I think, again, Adi Shankara beautifully explains in Atma Bodha. And then, of course, a great analogy he talks about, there are a couple of things, especially in Aparokshanubhuti, he talks about the rope and the snake analogy, which I'm sure you are very aware. We mistake a rope to be a snake. It was a rope always, it is a rope, it will be a rope. But because it was in the dark while you're walking on a street, there was no light, and there was this rope lying on the street, and you look at that, you're like scared, oh my goodness, this is a snake, and then you go through that fear. But then someone brings light, a torchlight or a lamp, and then you start to look at it from the top, and oh, this is not a head of the snake, this is just a rope. And then you keep moving, oh, this is not the trunk of the snake. Oh, I thought this was a tail. No, this is not a tail, because you brought light there. And the moment you brought the light and you realized that it was a rope, it was never a snake, we lost the fear. Same thing with our self. The biggest challenge in our lives is we go through this duality of one extreme to the other. We think there is an opposite for everything. And I don't blame anyone, because if you look at the world, there is a day, there is a night, there is black, there is white, there is up, there is down, there is left, there is right, there is life, and there is death. So when we look at these polarities, there is happiness, sadness, pain, pleasure. When we look at these polarities, we almost fall in trap, what they call Maya. I think this is Maya, right? We fall in the trap and we think that everything should have an opposite. Everything is separate. And in that separation, we separate, of course, ourselves. And in that separation, we build a false ego that, oh, I am separate from everyone. I am so special. I am different. Of course, it builds up ego in you automatically. And in that ego, of course, the fear is natural, because you want to hold on to things. You always want to hold on to pleasurable things. You always want to hold on to beautiful things. You always want to hold on to good things. In that process, we go through a lot of conflict and pain. The moment we lose that pleasure, we go through pain. The moment we lose the happiness, we go through sadness. So these dualities are the cause of the fear. Now, when we bring that light of self-realization, where you start to realize, oh, I am no different from the other person. They are the same, I am the same. In fact, coming from a scientific background, I also like to simplify this, and this is some of the work that we as a non-profit Peace Tree Innovation Society, we do is, we call this educate, experience, empower, three-step process. First is education, giving that knowledge. And not only just giving that knowledge, but simplifying that knowledge is so important. When you tell someone who's complete novice, oh, there is Atma, there is Paramatma, there is self, doesn't make sense. Like even for me, it didn't make sense when I was reading books. But what helped me was that experience, that realization that, oh, there is actually that state of being. So simplifying that knowledge again can be simplified even with simple analogies, taking just the physical aspect. Like you are there, Suma, I am here, Suman. Now I have a body, you have a body. What is this body made up of? Organs, tissues, cells. Is there any difference between the cells that I have and the cells you have and cells anyone has? No. The eyes in my body perform the same functions as the eyes in your body. The taste buds on my tongue perform the same function, the taste buds on your tongue. So even if we look at just that physical body, without going into the self and the spiritual aspect, we can educate people to help understand that we are actually made of the same material. The food that I eat, the food that you eat comes from the same earth, the same elements, the same 5 elements, which ancient wisdom calls it as Pancha Bhutas. In fact, one of the realizations, like Adi Shankara talks about it, everything in this universe is nothing but these Pancha Bhutas, these 5 elements. Show me which it is not. It is all Pancha Bhutas. Those 5 elements is what makes you, me, and everyone. It is the same air that I'm breathing in, the same air that you're breathing and someone else is breathing. So I would say this is like the first level of understanding, which we teach this to children as well. So these are simple things that we can help a common man to educate themselves about that sense of oneness. So once you start to realize, oh, Suma is no different from me. X, Y, Z are no different from me. They are the same. They are made of the same material. They are having the same experiences. I go through these different experiences. They go through these different experiences. That starts to develop empathy and compassion for humanity. And in that process, we lose fear. We lose that fear and we start to, once we start, of course, we go a little bit deeper into that self, into that state of self, we of course have those even more profound understanding that all that there is self. So that is another, like, one great example from Adi Shankaracharya's teachings. He also talks about a great analogy of gold and ornaments, right? There are different ornaments. There is your necklace, there are your earrings, there is, your bracelet, whatever. Like there are different ornaments. All are made from the same gold. The problem is our focus is on the ornament, on the outer shape, name and form. But in essence, all these ornaments are made up of gold. Gold is the state of oneness. Ornaments are a state of separation. But we forget to see that, and that's the delusion. And that's the education that we all need to have from all these ancient scriptures, to start to seeing the things as they are, not as we think they are.
Very well said. Did you, it seems like there is also similarities in what he's saying and other teachers like Ramana Maharishi are saying. And it seems like you are familiar with both of their works. I know there are similarities, but have you noticed any difference?
There is no difference, Suma. In fact, because they both are talking about that I, that self. Ramana Maharshi called it I. Like his way of inquiry was, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Nan yar, who am I? Just ask that question. But frankly, even though I came across these works before the experience, it was not easy for me to understand, okay, they're talking about this I. What is that I? Like, unless I have a glimpse of it, I need to have that glimpse. And that glimpse comes only when you start the process, right? And that's where, again, I feel that first experience, it's almost like you tell someone, like a little child, don't touch that flame, it'll burn your hand, right? The child doesn't know unless the child touches it once. We all have gone through this as children. We probably touch that once and, oh, whenever you touch a flame, it's hot. So I'm not going to go close to it in the future, right? So Aparokshanubhuti is again a fantastic text written by Adi Shankara, because he's saying that we all need to have the direct knowledge or realization of that self. So coming back to your question, yes, Ramana Maharshi is saying the same thing. Adi Shankara is saying the same thing. Vasishtha Advaita is also saying the same thing. It's all about the same thing. But I think everyone is going from different directions and approaching the same thing through a different path. And again, of course, the great Bhagavad Gita goes to explain this in a beautiful way. There are 4 different ways. You don't even have to believe a God for this. You don't have to have an idol or a physical form for this. You can achieve the same thing through karma yoga, which is through your work. When work becomes worship, which means you're doing what is called nishkama karma, means you are not attached to the outcomes of the work. You're just doing your duty for the sake of doing it. If one continues to stay in that state, you're not moved by emotions, you're not moved by change of outcomes, whether it is success or a failure, because we always set those expectations, oh, it has to come out this way. But the moment you let go of that outcome and just perform your duties for the sake of doing it, and I've experimented that in my own life, and it's wonderful when you do that. And that's where I think the concept of seva comes, the service. When you serve others with zero expectations, it's again a path towards a realization of that self. Bhakti Yoga, of course, devotion, right? Your devotion. Yeah, again, all these paths, I think we'll talk about that in a moment. So Bhakti Yoga is about devotion. Karma is using the aspect of doing things. That is one state of our being. The second state of our being, like bhakti, where we are using the emotion, the feeling aspect of our being. That is bhakti. You are completely surrendering yourself to what you think is a higher form out there, whether it is your guru, whether it's your God, whether it's your preceptor, whomever that is. Or it could be even the grandness of the universe. It doesn't have to be. Like, even a person who doesn't believe in God could have the same experience, just looking at the grandeur of the universe and surrendering to that and realizing how small, how insignificant we are in the grandness of these things. So that is bhakti. It doesn't have to be like a form of a worship, but the essence is that state of surrender. And then, of course, the jnana, which we have been talking about, the Advaita, the realization of self through introspection, dissecting the mind, going layer after layer after layer. No, not this, not this. Adi Shankaracharya's great teaching, neti, neti, neti. No, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, not this, not this, not this. What is left is pure wisdom. Doesn't have any words to even explain. You can go into that state momentarily as you go through that state of neti, neti, neti. That is Jnana Yoga. And then there is, of course, the fourth path, which is Raja Yoga, which is taming the body through yogasanas, taming the mind through practices of meditation, pranayam, breathing, all of these. So I think all these approaches ultimately take there, whether it is Ramana Maharshi, whether it is Patanjali, whether it is Adi Shankaracharya or Shirdi Sai Baba or Satya Sai Baba, it doesn't matter. All these great masters, I think the message was, I think there is, paths are many, but destination Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one. Scholars call it by different names.
Thank you for these beautiful insights. I think these are some great insights for someone who is beginning on this path to explore all these different approaches for self-realization. Is there anything else you would like to share today?
Yeah, I think, no, this is, thank you for the time as well, Suma. I think we touched upon many aspects, and one aspect I think I would like to again come back to is that mind is at the center of all this. The mind needs to be melted away. I call this process melting the mind. Like, you know, we take the golden ore from a field out there, from a mine, and then you have to process that golden ore, putting that through so much of fire, melting it, remelting it, melting over again and again. And then as you clarify it, you see the glittering gold. And I think it's the same with the mind. We have three types of mind, actually. We have the conscious mind, with which we are perceiving through senses. That needs to be cleansed first or regulated. And then there is the conscience within, which is that inner voice that has to be awakened. And only when we do those two, and then there's, of course, there's a third one, to subconscious, that has to be clean, because we accumulate, you know, as ancient wisdom says, not only from this birth, we carry all these, what they call vasanas or tendencies, from many births. In the modern way of saying this, you could call it in your DNA, right? So we carry those. And only when conscious mind is cleansed and regulated, when that subconscious mind is cleansed from all those past tendencies. The past tendencies are, oh, I am this, oh, I am that, I am only this. Like, all those strong attitudes and tendencies need to be cleared, where we go from a state of something, I am something, to I am nothing. So you have to come to a state of nothingness first, emptiness, clear everything, clean, 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 clean. And then you go to a state of everything, starting to see that, oh, I am actually everything. So something to nothing to that everything. And that everything is consciousness. So conscious mind to subconscious mind, cleaning has to happen. Then that inner conscience has to be awakened. And then the consciousness can be realized. And that is where I think ancient masters have given a path. You know, sadhana or practice is so important. It's not like you just sit there and you realize it's over. It's like a musician who has to constantly practice throughout the life for giving the best performance. This is a sadhana or a practice that we need to carry continuously, because in this process, you have this, of course, this sthula sharira, which is the physical body, and following those practices of dharma, righteousness is so important, putting the body through that path of dharma, because we also see many people who are realized but also go and do all kinds of things that they're not supposed to be doing. If you look at Rama Ravana, you know, in Ramayana, Rama is a realized being. Ravana was also a great scholar. He had achieved so many great things in the spiritual world, but there was that little bit of distortion in the mind, which made him do things that he is not supposed to do. So that righteous path, putting the body through that righteous path, and then putting that Sukshma, subtlest of the subtle, in the path of jnana, which is the Advaita, always in that state of non-duality. Every experience, translating that, am I going through a dual experience or am I going through a non-dual? If there is a dual experience, immediately that awareness, that constant integrated awareness, that is consciousness. It has to be constant. It can't be like, oh, I'm aware now, but I'm not aware another time. That is not consciousness. You are constantly in that, continuously in that state of awareness, so that you are moment to moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, and then it becomes a flow.
Thank you, Suman. If someone wants to find out more about you, peacetree.ca would be the website.
That's right. Peacetree, PEACETREE.ca is our website, and definitely they can reach us out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for reaching out to me.
Thank you very much, Suma. Namaste.